Okay, friends, let's have a little Bible study. Gospel of John. You'll need a Bible. Doesn't really matter the translation you use. Do stay away from paraphrases. Stay away from, stick with a translation, please. It doesn't matter. When you come to this text, you're coming to it the same way original readers were. That is, they will come to this particular text as if reading it for the first time, the same way you do. You're going to read words on a page, and you're going to assume meaning for these words. You're just going to read them. You're going to read, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This one was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made. That which has been made in him was life, and the life was the light of men, humanity, the human species. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot conquer, overcome, or understand it. And you think you know what all these words mean. Life, light, word. Yeah, you think you know what they mean, just as any ancient reader would assume they knew what these words meant. Okay? Now I want to show you the genius of this author as we move through the text, because one of the things this writer is going to do is he's going to invite you into a redefinition of a lot of universal language. And that's why this gospel is so powerful. It takes these words, light, darkness, life, death, these big words, and it gives them very concrete, specific meaning. Unlike the meaning we often put into the terms, just as the ancients did. So we have the privilege, in a sense, of hearing this text and letting it do to us what it did to every ancient auditor or reader. You with me on this? Do you understand this? Okay, good. The writer begins, in the beginning was the Logos. Now, I've talked about the Logos in the Jesus-Driven Life, chapter 8. There's a whole chapter there. I have a whole post, I think it's from December 23rd or so, on the Logos in What the Facebook Volume 1. It's 3 pages. And there, in that post in particularly, I use both Goethe and his, the little piece where Dr. Faust is tempted by Mephistopheles, and she's translating this text, and he comes to this term Logos, and he thinks, what am I supposed to do with this term? In the beginning was the Word. Well, that hardly captures Logos and what Logos is in ancient thought, either Semitic or Greek. And Faust goes, is it in the beginning was the deed? No, in the beginning was the act. There's something vibrant about this term Logos, right? And it has a history in Greek philosophy, going back to the philosopher Heraclitus. You never step into the same river twice, because the river's not the same and you're not the same. Things are always changing. That which gives structure and order to the universe is Logos, and for Heraclitus, Logos is polemos, conflict. That's what Heraclitus observed. It is conflict that creates order. This is a very interesting mimetic theoretical insight already way back when by Heraclitus. Bob Hamilton Kelly called him Heraclitus the Hierophant. At any rate, you have this term Logos. If you're a Jew, of course you're going to think of the Debar, of Hashem, the Word of God. You're going to think of, in Aramaic, of the Memra, this word that in the Targumic texts functions almost as a quasi-independent reality, in a sense, like the Son in relation to the Father. Okay? And so you have these backgrounds for this term, this potential backgrounds. But in every single case, no matter how you look at the term Logos, what's key about it is that for the ancients, Logos was the term to designate the structure of reality. Okay? That's how it functions. It's how things are put together. And when this writer says, in the beginning was the Logos, he's making a very, very bold claim. He's starting immediately with the universal, with everything as it is real. He's beginning with reality itself. That's the claim of this author in these opening words. In the beginning was the Logos. And then he's going to make a second claim. And that second claim is that the Logos was pros ton theon, face to face with God. The writer doesn't use meta or soon. The prepositions one normally associates with the English word with. I traveled with Bill, meta Bill or soon Bill. No, the writer uses pros, and pros it indicates very, very clearly we are dealing here with a relationship like this, okay? With face-to-face, okay? The Logos is face-to-face with God, and then comes the claim, and the Logos was God. Don't let the Jehovah's Witnesses freak you out over this text. Hey, there's no article in front of Hotheos, so it's the Logos was a God, a God. They're trying to parse things that can't be parsed. I mean, they're making an egregious error here in this text. At any rate, these three claims, in the beginning was this structuring principle of reality. That could be accepted by anybody. In the beginning was a structuring principle of reality. Okay? We can agree on that. And if we're ancients and not enlightened postmodern, so smart and full of ourselves because we're so scientific and technological and we've been to the moon and everything else. If we're willing to be humble, we can make the second claim, like the ancients. The Logos was God. The Logos is divine. Whatever structures things, God makes things. God's the maker, and this Logos, that God makes, or in this case, it doesn't say God makes the Logos. It says the Logos is face-to-face with God. Yeah, you could buy that. You could even buy the Logos was divine. One of the really important things that you need to know is that in the last 30 years, 35 years really, but in the last 20, there has been a lot of work done on mediators in Second Temple Judaism. Moses in particular is a mediator, Abraham and others. There's angels, and Richard Bauckham has clearly shown that to refer to Jesus as the Son of God was not anti-Jewish or something, or the Jews couldn't accept that. No, there was plenty of mediation going on in Second Temple Judaism. All you got to do is read First Enoch. You see it everywhere. So to make these kinds of claims, and the Logos was divine, that's no different than saying, the Torah existed before anything, and all things were created through the Torah. It's a claim the rabbis will make. In the beginning is the structuring principle of reality. It's face-to-face with God, and it is God. This one was in the beginning pros ton theon, face-to-face with God. Now here is going to be the repetition of an assertion. And that repetition is asking you to pay attention. This repetition is telling you that this Logos was in the beginning with God. Right at the start, right from the get-go. There's no beginning before this. This is the beginning. And in the beginning, the Logos is present with God, face-to-face with God. The writer needs you to get this. If you can't get this, you're not going to understand anything that goes beyond this. Okay? It's very important. Now comes the assertion. All things through him became. It doesn't say were created. The verb here is not ktidzo. It's ginomai. All things became through him. And without him, nothing became. Now look at this. Listen to this language. Whatever this Logos is, the structuring principle of reality, whatever that is, however, we haven't defined it yet. It hasn't been particularized for us yet. It's just the structuring principle of reality that we know is in the very beginning, at the very start with God, and in fact is God, as it were. The assertion is not that there are two gods. These gods are pros with each other. They're in relation. It's a clear identity relation, isn't it? And all things are made through the Logos. It doesn't say who makes all things. Well, who makes all things? There's only two characters on the stage so far, God and the Logos. God makes all things through the Logos. And without the Logos, nothing is made. If, as a Christian, your mind is already cycling back to Genesis 1, just as it would any Jew or Greek proselyte attending a synagogue in the ancient world. You're going back to Genesis 1 because this text is intentionally picking up the language of the first creation story in the book of Genesis. In the beginning, NRK. How does God bring things into being? God speaks. God does a debar. He speaks a word. You have the language of course, a little later in the text, life, light, humanity, darkness. All of this language is right out of the opening chapters of the book of Genesis. This is a reflection, a Christological reflection on Genesis. Now, what it is not is an affirmation of Genesis. That's not what it's doing. It's not going, oh, look, Genesis was real and Jesus was there in Genesis. It's not saying that. The writer's not thinking that way. You need to get that kind of thinking out of your head. First thing you need to get is that Genesis 1 is not a creation story. It's the whole story, beginning to end. It's the whole novel from A to Z. It's the summary. It's an eschatology where everything ends well. Okay? And in that story, there is a place for the human being, the male, female, created in the image and likeness of God. But in the New Testament, all of that language is going to be applied to Jesus of Nazareth. And as you'll see a little later as we get through this text, this Logos becomes flesh, it has a name, etc., etc. But even here, we have to be very, very clear that for this writer, this is not just saying, hey, take Jesus and stick him in the Old Testament. No. It's a rethinking of what's happening in that first text. It's a rethinking of it. One of the ways that you can really see the rethink on this, of course, is going to come in chapter 5. When we get to chapter 5, we'll see Jesus make the claim, my Father is a working man until today, till this very day, and I too am a working man. That is, the assertion is being made that the creation is in the process of being created. There is not a Sabbath yet. Hasn't happened. Okay, the creation hasn't finished. And of course, you've heard me say before, when is the creation finished in the Gospel of John? On the cross, in the dying, forgiving, loving Jesus, tetelestai, it is finished. I am finished. The creation is finished. I am the creation, the true human. Everything is through me. This is the trajectory of the Gospel of John. And you're not there yet, but since you obviously have read this text or are familiar with it, I can go ahead and skip ahead from time to time to begin to help you see that this writer is going to be turning all kinds of things upside down. So you're invited to do as any good Jewish auditor or a Gentile proselyte would, and you're invited to go back and reflect on the Genesis story and realize there's significant shifts from that story to this story. And the most significant shift is that everything that comes into being through him was life. There is no dualism of light and darkness. Everything comes into being through him is, life and death. It's just life. It's only life. And we have to get this. And it says, and the life was the light of humanity. Now, what is this writer doing? What is life? We haven't defined Zoe yet. We don't know what Zoe is. But to say that this life is the light of the human species is to make an incredible claim. To say that this logos, the structuring principle of reality through whom all things were created, is this life. And this life enlightens the human species. Now you're presupposing something, aren't you? Because you only need to enlighten that which is dark. The Genesis text starts with tohu vabohu, chaos. And God brings order out of chaos by speaking the word, let there be light. All your ancient creation myths, of course, have lots of blood in them. This one has no blood. It's a totally non-sacrificial creation story. And this is why this author can pick up on this. But he's going to shift, moving from darkness to light, and start with light and move to darkness, because darkness can be explained. Okay? It's difficult to understand. It's a challenge to deal with, but it can be explained because it is a human phenomenon. And we'll see that as we move through the text and the way this writer understands and uses the word, both scotia, and that's darkness, and nuktos, the word night. So the author continues, and by the way, I'm choosing to translate the Gagonen at the end of verse 3. Some of your translations will read, all things were made through him, and without him nothing was made of that which was made, period. In him was life, and the life was light of men. I put the full stop or the period after all things were made through him, and without him not one thing was made, period. That which was made, in him was life. That which was made in him was life. Who does the making there? The Father. That which was made in him was life. And that life was the light of humanity. And the writer continues, and the light shines, present tense, it's always shining, in the darkness, and the darkness is not able to katalaben it. Now, this is the writer's first use of a doppelganger, a word with two meanings. And the Johannine writer loves these words because it's the way that he's going to subvert our thinking on vocabulary, on the fact that we fill things, we fill terms and words with meaning that is not at all intended by the writers of the apostolic witness. And their challenge is to get us to, in a sense, purify our terminology. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot katalaben. This is a verb that can mean overcome, as in a physical battle. And it can also be used on the intellectual sphere to mean the darkness could not overcome or comprehend the light. The darkness doesn't get the light. It can't fathom it. It can't fathom light. It's darkness. It can't fathom it. And when the light shines in the darkness, it can neither overcome the light, nor can it understand it. It just is simply done away with. The light shines and the darkness is gone. Now, these first 5 verses are the prologue of the prologue. That this will carry down through verse 18. It'll take us a number of little sessions to walk through this. These first 5 verses, for my money, and I think that there's been enough good research to demonstrate that what we have here is an early Christian hymn. And if you take verse 6 and 6, 7, and 8, and then 15 and 16, and you put them together, you have a little narrative introduction. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. This one came as a witness to testify concerning the light, that all might believe through him. This one was not the light, but that he might testify concerning the light. And now skip down to verse 15. John bore witness concerning him and cried aloud, saying, "This is the one of whom I said, that I'm not worthy to unloose to." This one is before me, but I'm sorry, this one is after me, but he's before me. He's primary. He's first. And then you skip to verse 19. And this is the witness of John when the Jews sent so-and-so from Jerusalem. What you have there is a little narrative introduction. Verses 6, 7, and 8, 15, and 19. And you put them together, and each of the sentences begins with John's witness, John's witness, John's witness, John's witness. What this writer has done, he's taken verses 1 through 5 as you know them, verses 9 through 14 as you know them, and verses 16 through 18 as you know them. And if you put those together, you've got a lovely little hymn or poem, stanzas about this logos. And this writer has taken that hymn. It could have been sung in the early church, perhaps. It's possible. Walter Wink has an excellent essay in a Lou Martin Festschrift that shows that this text was used in hymnic fashion in certain Christian Gnostic circles. I'm sorry, not this hymn, but the Colossians 1:15 through 20 hymn, which is similar to this one. So that for me, the analogy is there. It's in Greek. One of the interesting things that happen is that the last major noun of each line becomes the major noun of the next line. And it's a finely structured text, but the author has woven into this and created a chiastic structure, this narrative of verses 6, 7, 15, 6, 7, 8, and 15. Just boom, and then verse 19. And he's woven this in. He's combined this theological reflection with history. For a long time, folks, for almost 300 years, this writer's use of history has been really misunderstood in the academy. This writer is so very, very, very careful. And you'll notice up to this point, verses 1 through 5, you just talked about logos and creation and light and darkness. There's no history. We haven't talked about this yet. We're still in the abstract. And then bang, verse 6, there came a man sent by God, whose name was John. Now everything gets immediately localized into a very small piece of geographic real estate on planet Earth in this territory known as Israel, and even then within a much smaller geographic space of the Jordan River out in the desert near Jerusalem. Very small space. All this abstractness has shrunk down into very clear particularity because this man also has a name, Yohanan. It is a known name. One of the things that has been suggested or asserted in scholarship is the recognition that John the Baptist had disciples that came to him and then left and traveled, much like the early Christians. Some would have met Jesus, the historical Jesus, and then traveled back to their home countries. It's with John, what we have are scattered communities, Baptist communities. The book of Acts seems to mention one in Acts 18. John is a known commodity. Josephus will mention John the Baptist. He evidently has such a following that he's a threat to Herod. the king. And when you get that kind of attention, well, you know, you've moved up in the world. So John is this known historical figure. And the writer's now tying the whole story of this Logos right down into this space and time. And he says that this man sent from God, his name was John, came as a martyr. Now, this is the first time you are going to run into a word that is going to be used hundreds of times in this gospel, martyr. You can translate it to bear witness, and to bear witness faithfully to the end, to martyr, to become a martyr, to die. So, but martyr is to bear witness. That's all it means. I'm bearing witness. I'm testifying to what I see. This is what I see. This is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. This one came as a witness. This is John the Baptist's function in the gospel. It's the function of other things in this gospel as we go through, and we'll see as well. There are many things that testify to Jesus. And this is the first, right in the heart of the prologue, is this testimony. And you're just going to get testimony after testimony after testimony in this gospel. This one came to bear witness concerning the light. This light that is the life of humanity and shines in the darkness. Okay, still abstract. John might be bearing witness to an idea. John might have a philosophy at this point, for all we know. Okay, it just says he came to bear witness to the light, in order that all might believe through him. Now, this is where it gets interesting. When the writer says, in order that all might believe, you are now also going to be getting the reason for writing the gospel. So if you go over to chapters, at the end of chapter 20, you'll see that the writer says, these things are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Son of God. He's telling you very clearly and plainly why he writes these things. Here, he's telling you that he's writing for the same reason that he perceives John the Baptist pointing to Jesus, in order that all might believe. Now, does the through him here refer to John the Baptist, or does it refer back to the light? This one came as a witness to bear witness concerning the light, in order that all might believe through him, that is, through me, through John the Baptist. Or this one came as a witness to bear witness concerning the light, in order that all might believe through the light. Is this another Johannine doppelganger? Is he inviting us to think both ways? That is, to say that it is through the light that all believe, that's true, and also to say at the same time that there is something very important about this testimony of John the Baptist that's happening here. Now, John the Baptist plays a key role in every single gospel. Mark starts right off with the citations from the Jewish scriptures about John the Baptist, the herald that's coming. Luke's infancy narrative is Jesus and John the Baptist twinned. And John the Baptist plays a significant role in the Gospel of Matthew when he comes on the scene in chapter 3 and then through the Gospel. And the question of the relationship of Jesus and John the Baptist is slightly different in each of the Gospels. They have different takes on that relationship, because it's always going to be a question of sacred violence. As I demonstrated in the Jesus-driven life, the only difference between Jesus and the Baptist was Jesus removed violence from the doctrine of God. The Baptist still had it in his second temple, Hanukkah kind of apocalyptic eschatological thinking. Jesus took that out of the equation. That changed the message. Okay? But he never renounced John. John was, for him, the greatest human born of woman. I mean, John somehow had gotten this close, and Jesus was willing to be his disciple, to allow John to mentor him for a season. All the Gospels start with the Baptist, But this gospel makes abundantly clear that the function of the Baptist in relation to the light is simply as a witness, just a testimony. That is, the Baptist is not to be the thing in itself, as though John the Baptist is something interesting in and of his own right. No. John the Baptist is only interesting as the figure that bears witness to this light. Verse 8 makes clear that John the Baptist is not this light. That is one of the things you'll find that Christianity, early Christianity did, was particularly the Galileans, was they connected themselves very clearly back to the Baptistic movement. And you see this in the book of Acts when they're trying to figure out who's going to be the next apostle, and they say, well, he's got to go back to the Baptist. We all came from the Baptist. We all got to start with this kind of John the Baptist thinking. And they went and they got somebody that fit that thinking, and they called themselves the 12. And they carried on. This writer's trying to say something to this group of this type of Christianity. John is not the light. Whatever you think about John's message, it's not Jesus' message. And John's message is not the light. John is not the light, but he has come to bear witness to the light, the sacrificial, bearing witness to the non-sacrificial, as it were. And then in verse 9, we leave history, we come back now. This was the true light, which enlightens every human being and is coming into the world. Is it every human being coming into the world? Or is it the true light which enlightens every human being which is coming into the world? Again, could be both. This is this Johannine writer's way of asking you to start puzzling out these double meanings. I think, again, it is a double meaning, so that's why it can go both ways. This was in the world. This one was in the world. That is, this light from verse 9, which is the life of verse 4, which is the logos of verse 1. Logos, life, light, they're all identical. In this verse 10, this one, this light was in the world, and the world, the cosmos, comes into being through him. Cosmos in this verse is the first time we're going to get this noun used tons. We get the word cosmic, cosmos, cosmetics. Again, you can use analogies here, but you want to use them carefully. But the concept of structure comes into play here. Pardon me, I realize this is probably not very PC of me and all of that, but as I understand the term cosmetics, it means to structure or order a face. But the cosmos is that which is created. It's this bigger reality. The Greeks have a term for the creation itself, ktisis, the physical creation. Okay, but cosmos is kind of like this universal creation. So we're still in this big ideal realm in the prologue. This one comes in. This one is in the world, and the world is made through him. The cosmos is made through him. And the world, the cosmos, did not know him. That's huge. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can't overcome it. This light is in the world, and though the world is made through him, the world does not know him. Did not know him. Couldn't figure it out, because it had structured everything another way, as we're going to find out in this gospel as it's revealed. And I'll leave you here right there today to think about this. What in the cosmos makes you think you know Jesus? Really? This is the author's question. I'll leave that. Talk to you tomorrow, eh? Cheers. Have fun.